apparently there's an afterlife. I have never been so alive as when I heard that doctor say I was dead. What we call death is a transition into another reality.
Things like terminal lucidity and after-death communications are absolutely real. But I was also told you're not here to stay. You'll be going back.
That felt more real than this reality of being in the body was so exciting, I have to tell you. It was great.
You got to remember there's no right or wrong in the spirit world. It's just all an experience.
Raymond, can you share briefly about your insight into people you've worked with who've had NDEs?
What happened was, I always like to say to set this up, was when I was a kid, I just had zero religious. To me, it was just a very bizarre area of life that I didn't understand. And the idea of an afterlife to me was just nowhere. I thought it was a joke. But when I went to college at age 18, became a philosophy major, and through that I learned about near-death experiences, because Plato and the other early Greek philosophers were very interested in these cases of people who apparently died and came back. So 3 years later, in 1965, I met an actual living person, Dr. George Ritchie, at the University of Virginia, who had had such an experience. And to make a long story short, since that time, I've interviewed literally thousands of people from all over the world who came to the brink of death and then had these phenomenal experiences. And I first got a PhD in philosophy, and then I taught philosophy for a while, and then I went to medical school and became a psychiatrist, ultimately working in forensic psychiatry. But throughout that career, I've just continued to interview people who came to the brink of death, and it has changed my life very much in terms of the question you propounded at the very beginning: is there an afterlife? Well, if you had asked me 5 or 6 years ago, I still don't know. I mean, I always understood that it's not what people say, the oxygen deprivation to the brain. It's not that, because the identical experience occurs often to people who are not themselves ill or injured, but who are there at the bedside of somebody who does. And as the one person dies, the bystanders have this same experience. So since they're not ill or injured, it means that it's not the oxygen deprivation to the brain. But what is it? I just didn't know. But I will say maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I just give up. I don't know how else to put this together other than to say that apparently there's an afterlife. And one of the kind of cases, for example, that really brought me to this state of where I don't know what else to say is a wonderful man that we're going to interview. He's going to be in one of our first webinars. He's a graphic artist from out west, and some years ago he was in this horrific car crash in which he lost a leg instantly. His wife was killed instantly, and one of his children, but he lived and had this profound near-death experience. And then when he finally got up the courage to tell his doctor about it, which people often are reluctant to tell their doctor, but he did, and this very eminent trauma surgeon, as this man is, acknowledged that night in the hospital, he knew his patient wasn't going to die because, as he told this artist, he said, because I talked to your wife in the operating room. The dead wife of the artist was there. And then as word about this spread, the scrub nurse in the procedure said, yeah, me too. I didn't see her, but I heard her. And I could give you a dozen other cases like that. But at a certain point, I don't know what to say other than, to my utter astonishment, there does appear to be an afterlife.
If we dive into NDEs, and I really want to go to shared experiences in a bit, are there similarities between some of the types of NDEs that come up?
Oh, yeah. It's the way it works is what I call a family resemblance. And that is that it's about 15 common elements that occur in near-death experiences all over the world. But one person may have one or two or three of those things, or 5 or 6 or 7, and rarely they may have the whole picture of the whole 15. And it seems to vary according to how far in they got. It's like the people with these extremely lengthy cardiac arrests that just go on and on and on are more likely to tell you the whole picture. But some of the common things that we all know of is people say that at the point where their heart stops beating, they may hear the doctor say, "Oh my God, he's dead," or words to that effect, which they often comment at that point. I've heard people say things like, "I have never been so alive as when I heard that doctor say I was dead." Right? And so as this goes on, they say that they leave their physical bodies, they rise up, they can see the resuscitation going on down below. At a certain point, they sort of realize that this has something to do with death. So they enter into a state of consciousness that no matter how articulate they may be, they say, "I just can't describe it to you. It's just beyond words." But the way they try to describe it is they say they go through this passageway, like a tube or a tunnel or a hallway, and they come out on the other side into this very brilliant and warm and loving light. You just feel taken up in this comfort and peace and joy. And you may see relatives or friends of yours who have died, who are there and as sort of to help you through the transition. And they undergo panoramic memory, where everything they've ever done is displayed around them in a sort of hologram. And then when they come back from this, they tell us that whatever they had been chasing before, knowledge or power or fame or money, whatever, they say that what really comes up to you in this life review is the importance of learning to love. They say that's what it's all about. And they say after this experience, just no more fear of death, because they are convinced that what we call death is a transition into another reality.
Would you say many of them find themselves on a mission when they come back?
They do. And Michael, I studied, as you know, ancient Greek philosophy, and that's when I first came across these things. And one of the early Greek philosophers, he was even before Socrates and Plato, goes way back, Heraclitus. He made a comment about these people who die and return. He said they are appointed to watch over the living and the dead. You say that they are sort of intermediate beings. And that's definitely what I have found. This Dr. George Ritchie, this first person I ever knew, living person who had one. To this day, Michael, I can say he was just the finest human being I ever knew in my life. And yet full of faults, which he acknowledged. He's like, George said to me one day, he said, "You know, Raymond, this experience makes your humanity even more of a burden in a way." And I've heard that same thought from a lot of people, but George was so kind. He wouldn't put it this way, but this is my translation of what he said. Yeah. What he meant was, let's face it, it's very difficult to get through the average day without wanting to choke at least one person. And so what George was getting at is that you're still that same way, but you've had this vision of the importance of love, but then you really have to get busy, and putting it into practice is a different thing.
Lisa, how have you been struck by people's final words, and what struck you the most?
Wow. What struck me the most is that if you look carefully at the language, you can actually watch the pathway of consciousness as it changes and evolves. And it may be that we just slip into other states of consciousness. It's not that we really go anywhere. We just shift or transition, right? Shift dimension.
Different radio station.
Different radio stations. And it's almost like the nonsense. It seems like static to us. I got to think of the nonsense as almost, you know, when you change stations on a radio and you go between frequencies, that static is to me like the nonsense. It's that place that doesn't quite come in clearly. Anyway, that was one thought I had. But what was amazing to me is when you freeze language, because for most of us, language is just this fluid thing that goes by. Most of us don't capture it, so we can't really track what's going on. But when you freeze language at a point of time, as we did with the Final Words Project for dozens of people at this point, you can start seeing the patterns of what's going on. So someone 3 weeks before they die start talking about waiting at the train station. And then this narrative goes on over 3 weeks. It's remarkable. It's like this living dream that's taking place. Or you'll see certain types of nonsense, certain constructions, paradoxical constructions, introductory offer, the store is closing. So the main thing that I learned is what seems like random gibberish. If you stop and you freeze it in time, you can begin to see certain kind of patterns. And to me, those patterns track some kind of shift in consciousness. The more I've studied them and the more I've grown to understand them. And then not only do you see the language change in very marked ways, but people start talking about seeing angels in the room. I mean, it's not just the language that shifts, but people's perceptions. So it's not just how they communicate what they are going through, but also what they're seeing. So now I was someone who, I was open-minded when I began this. I certainly wouldn't have said there is no afterlife, but I certainly did not feel it cellularly in the way that I do now. But in the 6 years that I've gathered these transcripts, now we're up to about 2,000 utterances that I've gathered. It's just cellular. It's how it might be for you as an NDE, experiencer. When you go through enough transcripts and hear enough people say, "Oh, wow, wow, wow," right? Steve Jobs, or someone say, after I have the scrambled eggs, where will you reappear? What? Or my modality is broken, or you hear this rich language that, when you look at it more closely, actually has patterns in it. And when I looked at the kinds of nonsense, there's really maybe only 5 or 6 that seem most prevalent at end of life. And so then you have to ask, why? Why those 5 or 6? Because Raymond has identified many, many more in his research in the past.
My grandmother came to life on her last day. The tube is taken out, and all of a sudden, it seems like she's back. She's not passing away.
Yes. They used to call that fey. Look up the word fey, F-E-Y, in the dictionary. It's an antique word, but the sort of central definition is a state of heightened or enhanced consciousness that portends imminent death. And it's very interesting, Michael. I worked in medical school a lot, and with terminally ill patients, and it just occurred all the time. You would go into the hospital one day, and the family would come so excited because Grandma has turned around. She turned, and she's back now, and they take that as a sign that Grandma's going to keep on living. But then you have to tell them, no, it means that she's getting ready to go. And it's like, even sometimes I've seen them with dementia, and it's just like months and months and no response, but just before they die. And you saw this, it's like they light up with a light, right?
That was Grandma.
And they talk to everybody, and not just not back to normal, but better than they ever were. It's like suddenly, it's like all their neuroses are just dropped off, and they are the pure person with that light coming out of them. It's just amazing.
What do you think's happening?
Well, I think, Michael, that what this means is that apparently when we die, our consciousness switches to a more energetic channel is all that I don't think there are any words for this, but what people tell me is that as soon as you're out of your body, you realize that this thing that you and I are in right now is a dream, and that people say that it becomes more real than real.
That's Eben.
Right? Yeah. It's more real than real. Right.
So now, working with the terminally ill, when did you first experience the concept of a shared death experience?
Well, Michael, that kind of reminds me. I hear all the time about these stories about poor Dr. Moody. There he was studying all this, and the medical people thought he was nuts. And that's just a beautiful story because I am a little bit of a martyr. But that's a good. But in fact, it never happened. And by the time I went to medical school in 1972, I had already been studying this for 10 years. So my friends in medical school had sent the word wrong among the faculty that the student was coming in September who'd studied this. Within the first 2 weeks, 8 of the professors called me and got to thank you for doing this because I had this myself or I've seen this from my patients. So in that context, in about December or January of 72 or 73, I was in the bookstore and this very nice woman approached me and she said, Dr. Moody, I've been wanting to meet you. She had identified herself as one of the medical professors there. I immediately recognized her name. But she took me across the campus and told me that sometime before she had been trying to resuscitate her own mother. But as her mother died, but when her mother died, she herself, the medical doctor, felt she left her body. She could see her body and her mother's body down below. She trying to look around. She became aware of her mother there with her, and she saw her mother recede into this light and the dead relatives of the mother coming. And so you see, she wasn't ill or injured. And so I realized that, and yet she had this same experience. So that means that it's not the oxygen deprivation to the brain. There's got to be some other factor or factors.
Share with us your story that began on November 10th in 2008. And with that said, as I was jotting notes for this, and I wrote down November 10th, 2008, I went, Jessica, this happened on your birthday. So
present.
The hairs kind of stood up.
Beautiful present, yes. Well, there are no accidents. That's one thing I've come to realize very fully. And of course, in Map of Heaven, I mentioned synchronicities and how we pay attention to that because these things do not happen. It's not just coincidence. There's a lot of meaning buried deeply and richly throughout all of our experience. So taking you back to November 10th, 2008, where basically I woke up with severe back pain and then discovered when my younger son, Bond, who at that time was 10 years old, came in the room and he realized I was having tremendous pain. He started rubbing my temples. As soon as he touched my head, I felt like he'd driven a white hot spike through my head. Wow. And that's about the last thing I remember. I was really gone from this world for 7 days after that point. And what I heard later from family filled in the blanks. And that is that my family left me there to rest, thinking I was resting. I was actually lapsing deep into coma. And in that process, they let me rest, came back about 2 hours later to check on me. I was having a grand mal epileptic seizure. Of course, I remember none of that. I remember nothing of the next 7 days. I was already long gone from this world when my family found me having that seizure.
From a physical perspective, what was going on at the time?
Well, at the time, what I figured out much later is that my brain was being overrun with an extremely aggressive, primitive, and absolutely should have killed me bacterial meningitis. It was E. coli, which they found out on the second day. Any doctors in the audience will realize that E. coli meningitis almost always happens in newborns. It's very rare beyond the age of 3 months. And yet that's exactly what I had. And the numbers on it, it's somewhere well under 1 in a 10 million chance that an adult spontaneously gets E. coli meningitis. I mean, it's extremely rare. So to this day, my doctors have no idea how I came down with this severe case of bacterial meningitis. What was the mechanism of it? I'm sure that the rarity of it was there to help keep me focused, so I wouldn't just kind of throw up my hands in despair and say, well, I guess the dying brain does all kinds of tricks and, weird things happen. Just got to forget about it. That's what my doctors encouraged me to do, when I came back talking about the experiences I'd had.
That's interesting. I had two NDEs myself, and after the second one, in both of them they had occurred from trauma, falling. One that left me with a titanium femur and titanium hip on the left side in a very rare way that it happened. And the second one left me with a matching identical titanium femur and identical hip on the right side. That they said the odds of the first one were 1 in a million. The odds of the second happening, 1 in infinity. And you got that same kind of thing, the bookmark that no way, just not possible.
Yeah, there are no accidents, so you have that symmetry across time for some reason. And I think that's a crucial part of this. Not only the rarity of the disease, but I started out that week with a 1 in, basically a 10% chance of survival.
Yeah.
But anyone who knows anything about bacterial meningitis realizes if you go into coma from this and spend more than a few hours or day or so in coma, you're pretty much not coming back. And that's what my doctors knew very well.
So what's going on? What's going on in the brain at that point as far as what's the bacteria doing?
Well, the important thing to understand, and this I came to realize in the months after my coma, is that such a case of bacterial meningitis in many ways is a perfect model for human death. The reason is that bacteria very specifically and efficiently destroys the neocortex. It destroys the outer surface of the brain. The outer surface of the brain is the part that makes us human. All of our experience as humans, everything about what we see and hear and think, and our words and language, and our perception of bodily awareness and of our surroundings, every single bit of that depends on the neocortex. It's not resulting from deeper structures in the brain. The deeper structures are more primitive. They're something we have in common with all other animals. But the thing that really makes the human experience special is the neocortex. Now, other mammals have a similar neocortex, but one that is not as complex as ours. Best case scenario, if I was in that 2% category that would actually live through this, was that I would be in the hospital for a month or two, be transferred to a nursing home in a persistent vegetative state, and die there a few months later, never having awakened. So that's why...
Basically, the brain was cooked.
Right. And my doctors... So on the 7th day, they were recommending just stopping the antibiotics. And that recommendation was because of the dismal prognosis without any hope for recovery. So yes, to this day, you can bet my doctors have no idea how I came back. And I can tell you, I often meet physicians who are familiar with E. coli or with gram-negative bacterial meningitis, and they come up to me like they're looking at a ghost. And they shake my hand in kind of this mystified state and say, I cannot even believe you are alive. And to me is a haunting mystery.
Your doctors were literally then saying, it's pretty much time to think about pulling the plug.
Well, that's exactly what they were saying. It was time to just let me go. And of course, it was a few hours later that I did start coming back to this world. But important to point out, and I mentioned all this in Proof of Heaven, but I don't know if I stressed it enough. When I was first coming back to this world, I had no memories whatsoever of Eben Alexander's life before coma. I had no idea who I was. My mother, my sisters, my sons standing around the bedside, I had no idea who these beings were. The only thing I knew was where I had been on this extraordinary odyssey that to me seemed to have taken up months or years. I mean, it was a very long, extensive odyssey, although it had to fit within 7 Earth days. And in fact, all the clues were there to show me that the vast majority of my coma experience happened between days 1 and 5 of coma.
So now that you've got my hair standing up on end, what was the journey you took?
Well, it all began in what I call the earthworm eye view, this very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm. It was like being buried deep in dirty jello. I can remember blood vessels or roots all around me, kind of this scratchy sensation. I had no body awareness at all during any part of my journey. And in that very crude and primitive, unresponsive realm, I had no language or words, none of my memories of the life of Eben Alexander, none of my religious concepts. I mean, I couldn't even sit there and wonder whether or not I was dead because all such concepts were foreign to me. So this was a very primitive, primordial state of existence, an empty slate, a tabula rasa, if you will. Um, I could still wonder, what, where, who. Never a flicker of a response to any of that. And that earthworm eye view, I think if I had just come back from that, I would have had what many people would call a hellish near-death experience. Because it was kind of a hellish or purgatory type existence, even though I had no notion of those kind of words at the time. The good news is I didn't stay there forever. I was rescued, and that rescue came in the form of a pure, clear white light that had fine white and kind of gold and silver tendrils coming off of it. And it spun very slowly as it came towards me. And it opened up like a rip in the fabric of that ugly earthworm eye view and led up into this brilliant valley that was absolutely ultra real and alive beyond any possible words. There was no sign of any kind of death or decay or anything in this valley. The valley is what I call the Gateway Valley or Gateway Realm, and it was absolutely lush and filled with life. Everything growing. I remember buds, blossoms, flowers that would just open in these rich textures. And I can still remember the textures just from their feel, even though I had no body awareness. But my awareness was reaching out and encompassing all of this.
Was it kind of like
experience.
Earth?
Was it like what?
Like Earth.
Well, interesting. There were many kind of Earth-like features in it. All of these plants and flowers and trees and butterflies. I was a speck of awareness on one beautiful butterfly, and there were millions of other butterflies, all swooping and swirling in these beautiful formations, waterfalls into crystal clear pools, mists rising up, this beautiful kind of unearthly light coming from all the clouds that were billowing up into the blue-black velvety sky. So it had earthly features, but in a sense, much better to look at this as an ideal Earth. I liken it often to Plato's world of forms that he describes in the Phaedo. And I think that that's really a best way of looking at it, because everything in that realm, and that includes the souls of departed loved ones and such, is in their kind of perfect form. Just like when you encounter a departed loved one in that kind of environment, like, for example, my father, who only appeared to me many, many years after my coma, but he's appeared to me in meditation and that kind of thing. And when he appears, he's in his early 20s, and he's extremely healthy with no infirmities whatsoever. And that's the way things are in that realm. They're in their kind of perfect form. It's kind of where our higher souls are, where we reunite with our soul groups, where we go through life reviews. Every bit of it occurring in that realm, which of course does have Earth-like trappings.
So what happened?
But on the other hand, it's far more than Earth-like.
So what happened with you while you're there? So you get there and you're like, I don't know what you're like.
Well, I was absolutely shocked and awed and amazed and astonished by the beauty of that realm on that butterfly wing. And there were thousands of souls down below that I described in my early writings as dressed in peasant garb, but very brightly colored clothing. And I thoroughly was just mesmerized by the beauty and glory of this realm. I remember early on in the whole adventure, this soft, warm summer breeze. It was kind of like a perfect breeze blowing through, and it was really my first awareness, given that this was a tabula rasa, that I had this amnesia for everything ever having occurred before. And that was all essential to the lessons that I was there to learn. But the important thing was that I was deeply immersed in that beautiful, loving realm, amazed by it all. And in fact, I was not alone on that butterfly wing. That was one of the most beautiful aspects of this. There was a lovely girl beside me, and I'll never forget her smile, the way she looked at me, her high forehead, sparkling blue eyes, high cheekbones, broad smile. She never said a word. She didn't have to. Her thoughts came straight into my awareness. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You will be taken care of. You have nothing to fear. There is nothing you can do wrong. And of course, when she said that, I knew already by that point that I was deeply into this kind of soul school and awareness, and that really this is all about learning the lessons, and important to realize that in our incarnations here in the physical realm, once we realize that the highest and best form of our ascendance towards oneness with the divine is manifesting that unconditional love for all fellow beings and showing love, compassion, acceptance, forgiveness, and mercy to all life and all of this creation, that we can do no wrong once we're at that point. But of course, that is part of the higher lesson we're here to learn, and that so much of this soul growth has to do with leaving behind those false boundaries of self and the ego, and where it puts us in this world and separates us from realizing the oneness that we all share, and that we're all truly here to share that love.
Every quantum mechanics scientist who looks at this at a fundamental level ends up becoming a mystic.
You basically must, because that's the way the world works. You know, and people can bicker and say, well, I want a natural explanation, not a supernatural explanation. All we're doing here is talking about the explanation as we approach the nature of reality and fundamental truth. So, and there are a lot of scientists who definitely get this, and that's the good news. They're not the ones who necessarily have the bully pulpit front page of the New York Times or Scientific American, although I must say I'm very heartened to see certain blog postings in Scientific American that show an openness to realizing that things like terminal lucidity and after-death communications are absolutely real. And that's something we've seen in Scientific American blog postings in the last year. So that's a good sign.
So finish up this journey for us here. Okay. Wrap up infinity if you can.
Infinity and eternity. Why not do that in a soundbite here in the next 24 seconds?
Yes.
But basically those swooping orbs of angelic choirs provided portals to higher and higher levels, seeing all of space and time collapsing down, and then even deep time and other orders of causality and higher spatial and temporal dimensions collapsing down into this complex oversphere. And at that point, I was out to what I call the core, infinite inky blackness filled to overflowing with the infinite healing power of unconditional love of that creative source, that God, that deity, that Om, as I call that deity, in that core realm. And
why do you call it Om?
Because of the sound that I heard, the sound that was, and again, you've got to remember, I mean, the skeptics really get lost here because they say, wait, you heard a sound? Obviously, we are so infinitely beyond the four-dimensional space-time physics that gives sound when airwaves impact the eardrum. But this is the way it comes back to us in our human mind and thinking. We have to use the words that we've developed in this body, living in this incarnation. So it's not a sound like you hear here, but that's how it comes back as a memory. And it far transcends anything that the physics of our four-dimensional space-time could support as a sound. But the sound that I heard deep in that core realm with that brilliant orb of light that was there kind of in the three of us, my awareness, which I hope you realize by now was all of consciousness far beyond the bounds of this earth awareness, grand mind, mind at large, whatever you want to call it. But it was in that core realm that so much of that was revealed about reincarnation, about the buildup of this space-time and of the higher spiritual levels above and beyond this, and about the laws of causality. So much of that explained in that core realm, but I was also told you're not here to stay. You'll be going back, but we have much to teach you. And that's exactly how it unfolded. The interesting thing is in the midst of those lessons in that core realm, I would suddenly and inexplicably find myself right back down in that earthworm eye view. And the good news is, by remembering the musical notes of the melody, I was able to rise back up and conjure up that spinning white light that served as the portal back up into the gateway realm, beautiful butterfly wing, and the girl and all of the souls dancing below, the angelic choirs above, and then back again into the core realm for more lessons. And I made this loop journey multiple times. And
was it trying to teach you that frequency, in a sense, But that's the doorbell, or
Oh, I think, well, certainly it was teaching me that sound and vibration, music, is the way of doing this. This is how
Mhm.
we can engender these transcendental conscious states. And this is something that I love sharing with everyone because you don't have to have a near death experience or a death experience to come to know and see what I have known and seen. You can do it as a conscious being, but it does take the work. And the work that I'm talking about is any form of deep centering prayer or deep meditation. And of course, the tools that I give to people who say, well, I can't meditate, I've got too active a mind, are the sounds that I work with Sacred Acoustics with Karen Newell and Kevin Cossey in developing of those sounds. And people can go to sacredacoustics.com to learn more about it. But the key is you need some form of turning off the little voice in our head and going within. As you start to realize, as my lesson told me very clearly, and what I point out in Proof of Heaven and the Map of Heaven, is given that the entire universe is really in consciousness,
Mhm.
that going within consciousness is our way of getting out into the entire universe. That's why meditation and going within is the key to all of this. The answers lie within us all. That's the title of the appendix in the book, The Map of Heaven, where I go into this work with Sacred Acoustics, and that all of us can go there. You don't need a near death experience, but it does take the work. And by the work, I mean of a lifelong practice. I try to meditate an hour or two every day, more if I can. I've been doing that for more than 4 years now, and I promise you, it is well worth the time spent.
The night before the accident happened, were you getting some interesting dreams?
Yes, and I'm glad you asked about this because I didn't focus too much on this in the book, but I think when a major event is about to happen, we're often outside of time.
Yeah.
And I was beginning to be outside of time that night before. I heard my dad's voice yelling through this tunnel saying, "Watch out, Tricia." And my mom screaming, "No, no, no, I can't believe this has happened." And I thought, why are they so panicked? With what's going on, and I didn't get much sleep before I went to run that race.
It could be a little bit of a chicken and the egg if you think about it.
I know, I
Uh,
know. Was it fated? Was it being outside of time?
well,
What
being
was
outside
it?
of time and faded, and if you didn't get that much sleep, then the next day you might not have been quite as sharp for the accident. But, all right, this is fast forwarding. I want to go into the accident itself, but death's a gift, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's a huge gift.
And so it was on some level. My belief says that this was necessary for your soul's evolution and for the evolution for all of us, because now you are a teacher, and that gets ahead of the story. So what happened the next day?
Yeah. So the next day I was sleepy and I was on my way to run the Austin 10K, and there's two synchronized lights, and I know the first one was yellow and I know I gunned it, and it just seemed like maybe I fell asleep for a split second, or I don't know, but by the time I opened my eyes there was a car barreling toward me at about 60 miles an hour, waving his hands, and I put my foot on the brake and collided, but I felt my ankle crunch, and then I felt my whole body just crunch. And I knew I was in bad shape because I couldn't reach my license and registration in the glove box, and I was slumped over to one side. And I have to say, there was this feeling of I had been desperately trying to control my life. And I remember laying there and thinking, I'm not in control now. Everything depends on who stops for me, the ambulance, if they get here in time, my surgeon, everything is out of my hands. And it was humbling. And I call it the foxhole type of prayer. But for a moment, I just prayed and said, "Hey, I'd like to walk. I'd like to live. Please help me." And that was about as far as my faith would take me. And then I was back in the physical
Yeah.
in that moment. And
You stayed conscious through this. This wasn't the near-death experience. This was the grisly, brutal, burning, searing, pain, holy crap experience.
right, this was the physical, which eventually seemed like torture because it was 17 hours before I was given any painkillers or taken into surgery, because a surgeon had to make the call and had to say, "I am operating on this woman." And unfortunately, it was a Sunday. And one of the surgeons, I overheard nurses talking. He was playing golf, and I didn't have health insurance as a student and someone who grew up poor. And they said, and I overheard these two nurses say, he's not coming in because she doesn't have health insurance. And my current partner worked in medical malpractice, and this happens. Like, people don't like to believe that it happens, but surgeons do choose to not come in if someone doesn't have health insurance. I eventually got help, and there was a woman who was off duty who was a surgeon, and she was willing to operate on me, but I still had to wait that long until a neurosurgeon was available. And Austin's full of young kids who have accidents, 50,000 college students. There's a great need for neurosurgeons, and they often were, behind schedule. So yeah, my experience didn't occur until 17 hours of internal bleeding and just laying there and being in excruciating pain. And honestly, it felt like more heat than anything at times. I started not really disconnecting from the body, but just I think you get overwhelmed at some point, and you're just in a different state of mind where it's uncomfortable.
But you asked for help, and this Dr. Flan, she decided she would operate on you. You signed a waiver, 17% chance of death. I love the number 17. To me, that's lucky 17. What happened when you went under?
So they must have been operating on me for quite some time, because my back was opened up. I lifted up out of my body, and my first thought when I saw the bloody back, and they had opened up my hip as well, and so all this blood was spilling out, as I thought, oh dear, this kind of looks like the Civil War. It's so gruesome. I'd seen different movies depicting World War One, and I thought, wow, surgery's brutal. But then my next thought was, oh, I go on, my consciousness goes on. And I have to say that my consciousness outside of body felt clearer and sharper and more intense than my own consciousness. Like, I immediately knew this was me, this was my soul leaving my body, and we continue on. And I wanted to go back and argue with my agnostic friends because they were so adamant. Some of them were atheists. And I thought, this moment alone proves that consciousness goes on, because I'm watching the doctors. The next thing I saw, though, were the angels in the
Before
OR.
you see that, were you attached? Was there an attachment? You're looking at your body and you're like, that's the body. I'm not the body. It's all good. What were you thinking?
I was okay with it. I thought it was kind of brutal, to see the body there, but I was more excited that something essential in me continues on, because I had thought maybe it doesn't, that maybe with death, there's nothing. And to know that felt more real than this reality of being in the body was so exciting, I have to tell you. It was great.
You mentioned it. It's kind of how I live my life on my better moments. Experiencing a childlike joy, new eyes. Well, I'm known for it on the show. A woohoo! Is that where you were at?
Yeah, I was so excited that we go on. It was just a complete reboot of my whole way of thinking.
So then, and you talk about it. So I had on Dr. Eben Alexander several times on the show. He would say it's more real than real. And in your case, you say it's an enhanced reality, not a hallucination.
Yes. So I was just so clear. If I am there in spiritual form, if this essential part of me is watching the doctors in my body, then all of us who are just going around in the material world are missing everything that's going on in that realm. And it's right there. And obviously mediums and psychics and highly sensitive people, and spiritual people are aware of this reality, but I had not been. Those 22 years that had not been in my reality. So seeing it was just like seeing the real movie. Like, I had been watching something that was filtered.
Very, very cool. So into the real movie appears, cue the angels. And I'm going to put angels in quotes because they never said, we're angels, and they never started flapping wings for you. What happened?
Right. I didn't even know if they were angels. In fact, I'd call them beings, and then light beings and intelligent beings. And then eventually I just gave up and said, all right, they're angels. but yeah, these highly intelligent beings, that was the first thing that struck me, is how much intelligence was in their eyes and how at peace they made me feel. So they were about 9 feet tall, massive. And they sent this light into my spirit form, which I think was giving me information about how to be in that environment, how to exist there and calm any part of that spirit down that was afraid. And then they said very clearly, watch this. And it was almost playful. And they sent this, not a beam of light, but this flow of light energy through their eyes, through the back of the surgeons, and into my body. And I could read the light as if it was communication. And I knew, oh, so my spine is going to be okay. I'm going to be able to walk. The doctors are assisted by these angels. And I almost had to chuckle because I thought, oh, these neurosurgeons wouldn't believe it if I told them that these angels were working through them, that they were the added extra power to the surgery. But then in that moment, the monitor flatlined and I recognized it from movies and TV shows. And I thought, oh, okay, now I'm technically dead and I don't want to stay in this room and watch this dead body. I want out of here. I want to see what else is available in the experience. And so that's when I left the hospital room. My near-death experience has been studied a bit by National Geographic and different places because I have this one verifiable detail of seeing my stepdad
The
get a candy
Snickers
bar.
bar.
Yes, yes. And to me, it has importance, not because it's a verifiable idea, but because my mom and dad, my dad were in the waiting room and they both felt that I had died at that moment and they were both praying. And so they felt the moment that my soul left my body and he was out getting the Snickers bar. He didn't know me very well. I thought he was a health nut and later found out that he hid Oreos in his closet and, definitely had a sweet tooth, but he got this candy bar and I asked Mom, hey, do you remember him after the experience and when I was healing up? Do you remember him getting this candy bar? And she said, yes, he came in, offered us some of his candy bar, made a joke, and we stopped praying and got up at that moment and hoped everything would be fine. So I saw him do that and then I left the hospital room. And I don't know in your near-death experience if you felt this sense of oneness. A lot of people do, but I was beginning to feel this oneness with everyone in the town of Austin. I have to laugh a little bit because some people have felt like a oneness with the whole planet. And I was like, why did I just get a city?
It's a good city to get, though.
Yeah, it's a good city. But I kind of felt this oneness with everyone there. And I just sent love to even people I'd briefly passed, like a barista or someone on the sidewalk. I was like, hey, live a good life, be happy, be joyous, enjoy it. And there was this sense of kind of goodbye, I love you. And that was what my soul wanted to say to everyone in that town. And maybe I loved that town, and that's why I felt that oneness.
Now you went and got a brief life review before you did that. Did you feel like Neo in the Matrix and being able to just take off?
Yeah, it felt fun. And I went through a little bit of that tunnel experience. So I was in the night sky and then I was in some sort of cosmos looking area with a lot of stars. And I just felt I'm not scared at all, but really happy and free and at peace. I think all of us are adventurers and at the core of us, and it's an adventure to come here and it's an adventure to go there. And so that part of me that the good part of my soul that knows it has a mission, was getting realigned with that and going, okay, this is my mission, is to be this individual and to bring this knowledge back. And so that, I was having a little bit of fun flying around.
And you were, I think, talking about being plugged in maybe to a fiber optic cable of information at the time, of which my guess is some of those things still pop today. New things still come up that you go, where did that come from? Oh.
Yeah, this idea, and I think many near-death experiencers are feeling it now, of bringing some of that heaven to earth. That seems to be a movement that so many of us are trying to do. And for 2 years, I go to this one meditation place and I think about parts of my near-death experience. I try to overlay the perfection and beauty and love to this planet. And just, even if it's one little section of my neighborhood or one little section of the river, I'm just trying to bring it in and trying to bring it in through talks and through connecting with other people. And so, that's one download that came alive in me. But the messages seem simple, but they seem to resonate deeply and powerfully and profoundly. So that idea of love is all that matters, that was a word phrase that came at me. And I took that to mean Well, every bit of abuse, every bit of harm and disappointment and sadness and depression doesn't matter. We don't take that with us. And that's not the essential truth of our soul. The essential truth of our soul is love, and anything we're doing to center that is the truth and is the truth of us. And so I thought, okay, it's all that matters. So focus on love and stay on that path. And then remind them to go to nature was another message that I got. And I think in this time, I'm seeing a lot of my students and young people worried about climate change, worried about their world, and also lonely and disconnected because we're so highly socialized to be on our phones. And so I try to create community in classrooms, and I try to take people literally to the river and remind them that their mood will elevate with just stepping outside, with just stepping under a tree. You literally feel better. And we're forgetting something that simple. And so I think that message was a simple one, but a profound one. Be like a little child was another message I got from the other side, which does resonate with the Bible. You know, the near-death experiencers get criticized for not having experiences that tie to one religion or another. And that message, though, it seems like it's beautiful and it can be tied to the Bible. It can probably resonate with people who aren't Christians, you know, that it's just children are full of love. And if you're like a child, you forgive easily, you love easily, you have faith and hope in this world. And that's what we need, is faith and hope.
And in 2001, you started seeing spirits. What was that like? What did you start seeing?
Holograms of people dressed in period attire, which is interesting. Star Trek, you've seen the movie or the TV show, Beam Me Up, Scotty.
Yeah.
You know, when Scotty's beaming Captain Kirk up to a different planet or a different ship or something, their body turns into a hologram of them before they're beamed to the other ship. That's what spirits look like to me.
But not in Star Trek attire.
Not necessarily. Although, interestingly enough, I've seen different past lives primarily on different planets, which has been interesting. I have a fun story about that if you want to hear it.
Oh, go for it. I'm very intrigued because I wondered if we stay on in the Earth School, or why wouldn't we go and explore the galaxies?
Yeah. Well, I had a gentleman call into my show one night. I do a weekly show. It's called Ask Julie Ryan, and people call in from all over the world, and they ask me everything from, can you scan me medically? Can you scan my dog? Can I talk to my dead grandma?
Yeah.
Did I have a past life? Whatever. So this guy called in and he said, can you see if I was an engineer in a past life? I'm an engineer in this life. Do I have any past lives and influence that? And I said, yeah, sure. So I got a past life for him, Michael, that was in the 1930s, but it was on another planet. And it looked like the set of Star Wars with the flying ships and all that jazz and towers. And all right, this is wild. And I got that he was in charge of the electrical grid, everything that had to do with power. This guy was in charge of it. And so I said to him, I got the year. I said to him, what kind of engineer are you? And he said, I'm an electrical engineer. I said, well, there you go. Again, can't make this stuff up. There are so many stories that I can tell you of validation that we get from past lives, from medical scans, from talking to deceased loved ones, that once somebody gets into this work, it's really hard to think that it isn't real, because it is, because there's just no way you can make all this stuff up.
So I want to go into your mother's parting gift. Before we do that, can you take then journeys and go to these other worlds or go to these other places and learn maybe even from other teachers?
Absolutely. In a nanosecond.
Wow. Favorite
and
place?
I teach people how to do that.
Favorite place to go to?
I don't really have one. This reality is just fine with me.
All right. So let's talk about this reality. Let's talk about your mom and talk about, usually when we think of somebody's parting, of a loved one parting, we don't think of it as this seems like a paradox wrapped within an enigma. What did you see? What did you feel?
That's a mouthful.
Would you agree?
No, I think that it's a glorious component that is part of the equation when somebody is dying. Because when somebody's dying, when we have a loved one who's dying, it's heart-wrenching in most instances. And so this adds the glorious component to it that helps equalize it. You know, it's all about staying neutral. It's all about the teeter-totter, staying in the middle. And this helps us know that there's more to the equation, know that our loved one is surrounded by angels and escorted to heaven by angels. It doesn't get any better than that. Know that our loved one's spirit is around us all the time. We can communicate with them at any time. How comforting is that?
So your mom's in hospice, or she's got hospice nurses around her. Can you walk us through that last day?
Sure. I live in Birmingham, Alabama. My mother was in a hospice facility in Columbus, Ohio. So they transferred her there on a Friday. We drove all night, which was a 10-hour drive. Got there about 9 o'clock in the morning, and she was not communicative at that point.
Yeah.
And the staff said, well, she's hydrated coming in from the hospital. She's probably going to last a couple of weeks. All my family was starting to gather from in town and out of town. And as the day progressed, I was seeing this configuration of angels and deceased loved ones' spirits that were in the room. And my deceased grandmother, my maternal grandmother, her mother, who had died 6 months prior, was running the show. That's what was so interesting to me, Michael. You know, we always think that angels are running the show, or some other spirits running the show, or God's running the show. Well, it's the deceased maternal spirit that's closest to the person who's dying, who's running the show.
So mom's job is never done.
Mom's job is never done. And we think, okay, our kids are grown and they're on their own. Well, we're helping our kids from the grave, from beyond the grave. And so my grandmother, we called her Mima. My Mima was bringing in angels and other deceased loved ones. And as the day progressed, what started out as a circle of angels around my mother opened into a horseshoe and kept expanding till eventually it was in a straight line across the foot of her bed. And more spirits of friends and family and other deceased loved ones from many periods. I mean, I saw people in medieval dress. I saw people in 1960s attire. I saw people that I had seen in pictures who I'd never met, who were family members of hers. And it got to the point where when she was ready to go, there were so many spirits there. And that's what I call the Welcome to Heaven Committee. There were so many spirits there, Michael. There were really thousands. It looked like dots on the horizon. And the line of angels was like crowd control, angelic crowd control. It was holding back the crowd. And it was the line of demarcation, perhaps, between the spirit world and our reality. It was really quite remarkable to see it. And this was the first time I had seen any of this.
And you've seen it many, many times since. I want to go into that in a minute. But now, our loved ones, from what I've seen, oftentimes check out once we've left the room. In this case, she waited till everybody else maybe had left, but she hung in there for you.
Right, right. I believe because she knew I could see what was going on and wanted me to witness all of that. And my mother was a principal and a teacher. And, you know, what a parting gift she gave me as a teacher. And I've used this with literally hundreds of families around the world to help them when their loved ones transition.
Can you share what you saw when
Sure.
or during? Or, yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So the circle of angels starts, the maternal spirit comes in first, the paternal spirit then comes in, then the angels show up. And as that horseshoe expands, there are two additional angels that show up on top of the person's head. As somebody's dying, the spirit exits through the top of the head, as I perceive it, Michael. And it looks like a bubble in a cartoon caption where the words or the character's thoughts are. And halfway through the 12 phases of transition, there are two extra angels that show up. And these angels look to me like what a Catholic girl would imagine angels look like. 12 years of Catholic schools, you know, big wings, long hair, white robe, all of that. Is that what angels really look like? Who knows? That's how they appear to me, so I understand what that energy is, because that's my frame of reference. Somebody raised in a different culture, for instance, in an indigenous culture in Peru or the Amazon or someplace, you know, they may see angels as a purple blob of energy. but I picture angels how I was taught angels look. And so as they expand, 2 extra angels come and they're on either side of the spirit bubble, I call. That's what I call spirit that's hanging onto the top of the head. And their wings start to move. And this I really found fascinating. Their wings start to move. And it reminded me of a giant owl, Michael.
Yeah.
It was slow and rhythmic. I could almost feel the drag from the wings moving. And these are massive wings. And they were creating an upward pull, an upward draft, a vortex, if you will, above my mother's head.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of driving through the car wash when you stay in the car and you're at the end and the water's getting sucked off by the dryers,
Yeah.
you know, at the end before you go out the tunnel. And so as my mother got closer to death, this vortex got very strong, and it eventually, what it does is it helps the body and the spirit separate. The spirit is the power source for the body. So when the spirit and the body separate, the body doesn't work any longer. But the thing I found fascinating when I was writing my book was I just for kicks Googled giant owl wings vortex. Mm-hmm. And I got this thing called a wingtip vortex. There are thousands of drawings. It's aeronautical engineering drawings, and everything that flies utilizes what's called a wingtip vortex, where it's a vortex that causes lift that gets underneath the wings. Every plane, every bird, every bug, everything that flies. And I thought, well, for heaven's sakes, I watched angels create this wingtip vortex in the spirit world, which in our human world helped my mother's spirit separate from her body. I thought that was really remarkable. And I see it every time now.
So let's go, thank you. Let's go through these 12 phases. And now how common is it for you to be with someone when they pass on now?
Not very often, but like sports on TV, I can do instant replays in my head, and I can describe to them who the spirits are that are there and what's happening. I think it's also important to note that the 12 phases of transition can happen instantly, Michael. Mm-hmm. They can happen over days, weeks, months, even years. There's a woman that called into my show for a couple of years whose father was in phase 11 of 12 for 2 years. He was dying and he had Alzheimer's, and it took him 2 years to exit. So remember, there's no time in the spirit world. So time is a human concoction, a human invention. And what we see as 100 years may not even be a blip on the radar screen. 100 lifetimes may not even be a blip on the radar screen in the spirit world. So it can happen instantly, like in the case of a suicide or a homicide, or it can take days, weeks, months to go through the 12 phases of transition, but everybody goes through them.
So let's go through each one. We'll parse this down. We'll break this down. First, spirit exits body. What does that look like, and what do you think that feels like for that person transitioning?
It looks like a bubble, like I was mentioning earlier, like a cartoon caption bubble where the words of the character or the character's thoughts are, and it hangs on to the top of the head. And the correlation that I believe is, if you've ever read anything about near-death experiences, and all cultures, all socioeconomic status, all, religions, my gosh, the research and the documentation is just mind-blowing how much of it is there, how much of it exists. So they talk about going through a tunnel. That's one of the things that a lot of people with near-death experiences discuss that they have in common. And I believe that's what's happening.
Thank you. And then number 2, parents arrive.
Right. The mother shows up first, the maternal spirit. If the mother is still alive, and it's the maternal grandmother. If the maternal grandmother is still alive, it's the maternal great grandmother. It's always on the maternal line. Yeah. Interestingly enough, too, if someone who's dying has been adopted, it's the mother that raised the person.
And then number 3, third phase, angels arrive.
Right. Angels show up. They form a circle around the person who's dying with the parents at the anchor. The mother is always at the person's left foot. The father's always at the person's right foot. And there are diagrams of this not only in my book, but also on my website, AskJulieRyan.com. So anybody can see them there.
Do we all have guardian angels, and how many do we have?
Yes, we all have the same guardian angel that stays with us through all of our lifetimes. And that guardian angel along with the mother spirit, brings in these additional angels to help when someone is transitioning.
I can picture this guardian angel of lifetime after lifetime going, no, not again.
No, I think you got to remember there's no right or wrong in the spirit world.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all an experience. So we judge things in our human reality as being right or wrong. And we need to, if we want to survive, my gosh, we want to be able to live. But in the spirit world, there's no right or wrong. It's just an experience, and every experience is a benefit to the person.
Automatic writing is perhaps the most cutting-edge tool for connecting with the other side, which is why we've written the definitive guide called the Automatic Writing Experience. To find out more, simply visit automaticwriting.com. It's my favorite way to help you to shine bright. Woohoo!